Adopted at 15 after a lifetime in a Russian orphanage, she thought her rescue had come. But what happens when the new beginning brings more pain than peace? Today, we're continuing the story of a woman who endured suffering on both sides of the ocean, but found a freedom no one could take away. Part one of our time together, we were talking about how God pursued you in that really hard place. And so if you did not listen to part one, I would say pause, go back, and listen to Lilia's story of living in an orphanage with 800 other children, how God showed up in two miraculous ways to let her know that she is seen and she is known and that he does care. She was adopted, and we're catching this part of the story where she is coming to America with all kinds of hopes and dreams for what that might be. And yet there was still hard ahead of her. That's not where we will end our story, though, because her story is one of a powerful redemption. So welcome back to It's Your Story to Tell. I'm your host, Megan Babcock, and we are continuing with Lilia and her story. And I'm just going to let you continue to walk us through what happened after leaving the orphanage and coming to America.
Thank you for having me, Megan. Thank you for everyone that's listening in. I hope this really encourages you as well. I wanted to continue through the adoption process. I remember when the kids started to come in with the influx during the collapse. I remember hearing the terms for the first time: mom, mother, father, aunt, uncle, grandma, grandpa, brothers and sisters. And I remember being fascinated with that concept of understanding. Like, what is that? What does it mean? Who are these people? Why is there such closeness there that I have not yet experienced or have seen it? And through the adoption process, I remember when finally the news came that I would be coming to US and I would finally gain a mom for the first time. I was trying to understand and imagine what that was going to be like. Am I going to be held for the first time? Will somebody tell me they love me for the first time? That was non-existent in my childhood at all. And so that emotional connection did not exist. And I remember arriving to US and I had met my father for the first time. I remember tearing up because I just wanted to have that, like, wow, I'm going to have a father for the first time. And I have a mother now that's already taken me through this adoption process. It took 3 weeks of traveling and all the testing and everything. And this was, by the way, 1996. So communication in that time was very different. A lot of communication was handled via fax and everything. It's not like today where we have Viber at our fingertips and WhatsApp. So it took a lot longer for the whole process. And I just remembered when I arrived to my new home. By the way, those of you who are listening, my adoption story isn't exactly a Cinderella fairy tale, but it is one that I most definitely hold dear to my heart because I acknowledge many great blessings in there. My excitement for receiving a family was just out of this world.
Are you tired of repeating the same patterns, feeling stuck in your story, and wondering if real change is even possible? In my new book, Unstuck, Break Free from What's Holding You Back and Create a Life You Love, I walk you through the path from survival to transformation, blending faith, neuroscience, and soul-deep healing. This book, it's not just words on a page. It's a companion for your journey. Whether you've experienced trauma or just feel lost in the noise of life, Unstuck will meet you there with truth, compassion, and tools that actually work. It's time to stop surviving and start living your story with purpose. Grab your copy today on Amazon and let me know what you think.
I knew I was receiving two little sisters because they had adopted two little girls that were not related by blood to me, but they related to each other. And I remember trying to imagine what that family setting was going to be like. I've never been in one. I've never heard such terms. I've never experienced anything like that. So I was trying to imagine that. It was wonderful. That first coming into US was great. I mean, I remember experiencing, I had arrived May 24th, so we were not far from July. And I remember going to that very first huge gather of 4th of July celebration, um, trying a hot dog for the first time. I ate like 16 in one setting. I was just so amazed by like, and then I remember ketchup. I was so fascinated with ketchups. I kept those packets hidden in my pockets because it was so good. It was so delicious. I remember entering the grocery stores. I've never seen so much food in my life. Where I grew up. When I say growing up in like a little house in the prairie, we only had a butcher, a dairy, and a baker in town. We didn't have such grocery stores like we had here. And even in that time in 1986, you walk in and you have like noodles and different sorts of breads and different, like, everything is prepackaged and this canned items. I'm just very fascinated by that. As in a few months into me coming to US, there was some unfortunate turn of events that happened that caused for separation between a mother and the father. And my physical abuse began and continued for the next couple of years. I remember feeling that the walls came collapsing back in there again. I just remembered feeling when I left the orphanage, I thought I was safe. I can be free of that. I'm free of that pain, free of the abuses that I experienced in that time. But unfortunately, it came back again. And it continued as well. In that time, of course, I didn't understand any of that. I know when I share this story, I had people come to me and ask me, why didn't you go to the authorities and this and that? I need everyone to understand. I had no understanding that I could go to someone for safety. It did not exist. There was no human pillars in my life that offered me that safety that says you can come to me if you need something. So in that time when you have a threat of going back to the orphanage was going to be a possibility, I was, better believe it, Megan, I was willing to do anything it took in that time. So, but with that, I was also very grateful. The labors of cutting the grass and things like that, though they were pushed on me, forced per se, I was also very joyous to do them. Chores to me came with ease because I was already used to doing them in the orphanage. So, but also in that time, I was introduced to going to church and things like that, though I fell from it far away because I was just not there emotionally. So I moved out at age 17 and a half, approximately. I wanted to run away from that. I got my own apartment and life continued. I now have 3 jobs in that time and I'm trying to just make life happen. But now here on this side of the ocean in US. I knew there were still a lot of great possibilities and things because I was like, I would not have been able to even establish my life in that time in the way I did by comparison to the orphanage after leaving the orphanage gates. So it was one of those times when I met an individual at one of the malls and he had a table set up with unique figurines. And I was like, these are Slavic figurines, Russian, Ukrainian, Romanian, they're all the same anyway. And I was like, wow, where did you get these? Anyway, to make a long story short, I met this young man and those were his pieces he was selling. And he introduced me to a Russian youth group. Before you know it, I was introduced to that culture. And now I am in the Christian-like setting for the first time. At age 21, we were traveling all over, not all over US, but just on this side of the US, on the east side, and to different youth group conferences. And I remember it was one of those times when I was at Chicago, a conference, and there was an altar call. And I remember I had already been with the youth group for about 2 years. I've heard plenty of Christ. I've heard plenty of God. I was getting introduced to the doctrine and what that's all about, what that Christian walk is all about, though I had not accepted Christ into my life in that time yet. And I remember there was that altar call, and there was something that overtook me. I was about age 21. I closed my eyes, and somehow, some way, I followed the light in that time when I walked, but I ended up on the stage. And the only way I came back to my senses is when someone put their hand on me and wanted to pray over me. And I remember opening my eyes, realizing where I stand and realizing what I had just experienced. I knew that in that time, I accepted Christ into my life. I was ready to take on. And with that, Megan, there were so many doors that opened. It was just, my life as a Christian just propelled. I was flying. I was zealous. I was flying free of spirit. And I was just ready to take on the world. I'm so bold and courageous in my faith. My faith had already existed. I had finally put the name to that. But then now the walk began. Living Christian-like began. The whole understanding of like possibility of even being a mother one day, a wife one day. What is that like? I still coming to US. I had not experienced that up to that point. So I was introduced to a couple of families in that time, and I saw the Christian settings. I saw what the holidays are like. Megan, I had to do a lot of catching up. I had to do a lot of like, what do I want my family to be like? What kind of values and principles do I want to raise my children in? What sort of wife can I be for my future husband? So yes, when I say my Christian life had propelled, it really took on to such great heights. Today I'm married. Well, we're 20th anniversary coming up for my husband and I this October. I'm so excited. I can't say it's been a roller coaster ride. Yes, we've experienced a lot of hardships, a lot of turmoil, but there's a lot of grace and sunshine and mercies along. And we have 4 children. We've been homeschooling, and my life, like in the last 20 years, has really signified. Apart from learning how to be obedient to God and His Word, and just like prior to that 20 years of marriage, I wanted to share a brief story because it also gave me some closure, and in the sense it helped me on my Christian walk. I did go back. It was the summer after 9/11. Oh, how ironic it's today.
Wow, today is 9/11.
Yes. It was the summer of 9/11 when I traveled back to my country, back to the same orphanage I grew up in. But this time I traveled with the Christians, minds alike, Christ-like, and that were able to help me cope, help me overcome. I received so much support. And I remember traveling back, and I'm seeing, this is only like 7 years apart, and I am seeing the same authority, the same teachers, the same kids. A little bit older now. And I remember feeling like I felt anger in that time, but yet I had also received forgiveness for them. I remember it gave me a sense of closure, and it brought me a lot of healing when I was able to face my abusers face to face. And that helped me a lot to come to where I am today, to be able to truly forgive your abusers. Because some of my abusers came with no face, and a lot of them came with the face. Of course, but without a face, when it happens in the night, you don't see. All you have is the smells and things. It's easier to kind of push that away. But when you have a face to that, and then, of course, my adopted father and the unfortunateness of that really added a lot of heaviness. So in the last 20 years, Megan, I would say I have about 8 years ago encountered about this program with the Teachers with God in the Center. And prior to that, I've always had Christian counseling that I've done for emotional health because my foundational bricks did not exist. They were non-existent. Safety support. Yeah. So abandonment, there was just so many insecurities attached with that. So in the last 8 years, my life has propelled even further when it comes to having my emotional self. My spiritual has been brought about in a very balanced way when I've dealt with a lot of emotional and healing that came with that. But with all that said, I want to say that the softness of my heart remained through those times. And I cannot, the amount of gratitude I have towards God for keeping me in that state, it's just, the words there's not enough gratitude I can say in words, because keeping my heart soft through all the experiences that I've experienced, and to be able to still come here today and share my story. That's one of the things that people always ask me, like, how can you still turn to God after all of this? I say, you know what? I wouldn't be here speaking about my testimony today if it wasn't for God doing the work within me.
Yes. Wow. I'm so glad you shared that story about going back into that place where abuse and hard things happen. And God took me back to something that was so hard when I was doing my healing work. Not physically, I didn't go back to it, but He took me back to get curious and to look around and to see things from His perspective, or see and have compassion for other people who were doing harm because of what they experienced. And it's not to make light of the abuse, but it is to allow you to see that hurt people, and they don't know better, right? It was the culture they were brought up in, the family that they were brought up in. Abuse happened to them. And so they are just doing what they know. And we all come to accountability for our actions. And God does show up in our stories, even when we don't know who God is or what He is. He wants to reveal Himself to us. And so He took me back into this experience, and it wasn't like anxiety provoking or where I was having post traumatic stress over it. And He allowed me to just get curious and to like look around and to understand like what happened in that moment, because that moment changed me and it was impacting me in every area of my life. And it was not allowing me to have the life that I really dreamed of. So, like, I had a dream that I wanted this life, but I had this experience that shaped the way I saw myself and the value that I had for myself. And He allowed me to see that in that moment, I had made agreements that I would never have a good husband, and that I didn't have value because of what had taken place. And so I counted myself out for what God truly had for me, even though it was not an act of something that I was wanting. I took on all of the consequences of this and allowed it to impact the rest of my life. And that was 20 years of time passed with more hardship and more trauma, because when we don't deal with the things from the past, they keep showing up because God wants to redeem them, right? And so He brings it into the light. But unfortunately, I kept going with what I knew and did not allow Him to bring healing until 20 years later, when I was in a very broken place. And I finally said, okay, Lord, I'll do anything. And He started walking me through a process of transforming my mind, renewing my mind, speaking truth over my identity, your identity, right? And when you can go back into those places as a new creation, there is so much healing to be able to see that I can walk in there and it doesn't have to continue to impact me the way it does. I can lay down my anger. I can choose forgiveness. And it's not forgiveness, for a long time, I thought about forgiveness as turn the other cheek, be the bigger person. But forgiveness is really setting ourselves free. It's saying the choices that you made no longer are going to
Impact.
direct my life.
Yeah.
And I'm so thankful that you were able to have that closure. And that closure is available for anyone who wants to walk through it. And, you talked about having people come alongside of you, right? This is when you have experienced such trauma and abandonment. It can be so hard to open up and trust people, yet it's the very thing that will bring healing when you do. It's about having wisdom about who do you invite into your story, right? And I know in my own story, it was getting into a group of women and being vulnerable and honest and allowing them to witness the pain that was in that story, because I didn't even know how to have compassion for myself in that story.
Yeah.
I mean, I was very critical of myself, and I needed to learn these new skills that I didn't get taught. Even though I was here in America with parents who loved me and went to church, there were still so many things about emotional well-being that I didn't know how to navigate. And so thank you for sharing that. Tell us a little bit about how you are using that to come alongside others. I know you have a book, but what are you doing to use your story to help others find this freedom?
Well, I've had a lot of chances. Gosh, I pray a lot when it comes to coming out there to share my story. It's not easy because most times it throws me back into the memories and into reliving them emotionally, mentally. Though I know I'm not in that sense of danger anymore, it's there. It still affects me. The memories are there. Experiencing wholeness beyond trauma has really, the work that I have done in the last 8 years has really done so much for me when it came to, like, that's one of my biggest catalysts is the emotional health of it. And when I have had a chance to revisit, let's say, all of my past, which is one of those things, obviously, for me, I fought it the most in that time when I heard that voice that said, you need to do this and you need to revisit. I mean, it's one of those things that none of us want to do. None of us want to revisit the painful past, but it's only natural because it's very painful. It's very hard. But I had realized in that time that whether it be family of origin, like you said, whether it be a cultural differences, whether it be in the type of background we grew up in, it shapes us. It forms us. Our childhood, our very pivotal moment of our existence, it's in those early years. Because in those early years, we are so original. We are so original before God's eyes, meaning we know how to laugh, we know how to cry, we know how to experience all of those things, right? But in that time, we're also experiencing the traumas. We're also experiencing the pain and the brokenness. And now we're finding ourselves in that. Before you know it, we're in adulthood and we are facing everyday situations. And yet we're not realizing how that past is impacting on how we are approaching to our everyday life. And so I have had a chance to be able to speak on some of this in women's groups and on stage and sharing my testimony on how important it is. I encourage people. I mean, obviously, first and foremost, you have to pray and ask God. And if it's meant for you to go revisit, do that, because I mean, it's not easy for majority of people. But I will say, I wanted to also inspire in the sense of light and hope. My testimony is one of the wonderful examples of how God's light illuminates through darkness. It penetrates through. There is nothing. I have learned only in the last few years that there's nothing in this world. There's no amount of darkness that is in this world that God's light cannot penetrate through. So when you hear those words, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. I wanted to encourage each and every one of you listening here. You've heard there's many more traumas, and I would want to encourage. There's a lot of this book I've written, Open Fields and Iron Curtains. Open Fields is my freedom, my sense of freedom as a child that I experienced. That was my runaway to coping mechanism. Iron Curtains was, most of the older generations would know that this is referred to the former Soviet Union. It is visceral experience book. It's a quick read, but it is my entire childhood. up to the time of leaving the orphanage gates. And it's the very testimony of how I was able to, when I've written this book, I had 3 times when I was prompted to write this book. First time when I first came to the US, I was sharing some of my stories. People were in disbelief. And I remember in that time I was encouraged to write English with the barrier of English. I could not even pose a sentence, let alone write a whole book. I said it was not for me in that time. I remember 20 years ago when I met my husband, that was for the purpose of writing my book. But instead we got married and had kids. So got put on shelf again. But only about 3 years ago, my husband bought me a DNA kit. I wanted to share this, Megan, if that's okay. This is how God works through you. When you're willing to listen, when you're open in your heart and you're being very intentional with what you want God to do through your life, amazing things happen. And he opens up the doors. It doesn't mean that you don't still experience hardships and difficult life in general, but it just means that there's a new way of approaching life that really helps to navigate. And anyway, 3 years ago, he bought me a DNA kit, in which I told him in that time, because I was curious. I'm 40 years old in that time, and I'm like, I still don't know anybody that I belong to in this world, by blood. I mean, I already knew I was a daughter of God, the great King. I had already that within me, but there was still some sense of belonging that I wanted to know, where my blood is related to. So he bought me the DNA kit, and I told him not to bother spending money on it because reviews said it was just mostly English from England, and there was no Slavic, not a large database for that. But I submitted my DNA anyway, my saliva, and then what do you know? 4 weeks later, I received this notification on my phone, and it says, you have a first cousin living in New York. And the image came up on my screen, and I remember I was being I was like in a state of shock. It is the first time I have seen an image that resembles me. My first cousin and I look so much alike. And I remembered like that whole thing just started to unravel within seconds. She receives that same notification. And we started talking, and within seconds we were on the phone with each other because we were curious, where is this going? God willing, this will be in my second book. I'll be sharing that story, but there is a little bit of intro in there. But really quick, so talk about the way God opens up and allows. It's like God's timing is always perfect timing. I have learned to depend on that more than anything. And so I remember in that time, I traveled back to Moldova. I found out that my uncle acted like Sherlock Holmes. He found out I belonged to his sister, one of 3 sisters. She's the only one left alive. To make a long story short, I meet my biological mother for the first time. And I remember when I came back to US, I was in such a state of like feeling like God's grace is over me and mercy's over me. And like I've traveled this life of 40 years. And now I have somebody I can like, okay, so what is this all about? And things like that. I wasn't afraid anymore to, how they say you open up a can of worms per se. I wasn't afraid of that anymore. I was like, what could hold me back? You know what I mean? I have got God all along. I mean, if you take the time to look, there are graces that exist. When I wrote this book, I wrote it with such a balanced approach. If I would have written it 20 years ago or 30 years ago, it would have been dark gloom. It would have been, there was no hope in there. It was so dark and that was the reality. But when I took the time to reflect, like you said, take the time to revisit, it allowed for this whole new sense of understanding how God existed in the times when we thought the least. Like he was there all along. He was there all along. And my book is the very example of when I share those stories, you're going to see the dark, but you're going to see the light because it's there. It exists. And so it was 3 years ago when I heard that voice. It said, right. Though I had threw at him all sorts of curveballs at God at the time. I remember so many insecurities came flooding in, like English language barrier, people are going to look at me. I mean, I'm just an open book. Read me, please. You know what I mean? Suddenly it was just so many insecurities and taking over. And I just questioned, is this the time? This was the third and the final prompting. And it was so strong when I heard that clear voice that said, right. I was like, okay, I'm writing. And whatever happens, happens. So Anyway, so
Wow.
I wanted to encourage listeners that yes, take the time to reflect, take the time to go back, acknowledge the hurts and the pains. Um, and when you get through that, there is a place for finding understanding that God did because he helped you survive in that time. For me, when I looked for God's grace, it was those things as well. He helped me survive. He helped me overcome. And those are the things that I share the most about that helped me overcome. So yes, when I talk about God's light illuminating through the darkest places, don't be discouraged. I want you to have that hope.
Yes, yes. I mean, there's so much purpose that can come out of our pain. And I'm always encouraged by the scripture that talks about that all things work together for good for those who love God and are called according to his purpose, which means there's bad, right? Because sometimes, and right now, our nation is walking through some really hard things, and
Mm,
we're questioning, where's God? Why would you let this happen?
yes.
But what we do know, or at least as believers, is that God is who he says he is. And he's already said, he's won the battle. The victory is ours. And so we have to stand in that truth. And that's one of the things that God has really been highlighting for me in this time is that being obedient, because he knows all of the things happening in this world and he's using all of them for the good of people even that we don't love, that we are thinking that is injustice, they should be killed for what they did. Like, that's not how God sees all of his children.
Mm,
And he's been reminding me to remember that he loves each and every one of us. And he wants each and every one of us to be set free and to live a redeemed life in this world and for eternity. And in order to do that, we have to keep stepping into alignment with the promise, even when it doesn't look like it's there. And what happens is you are changed from the inside. So your external experience becomes different, even though there's still hardship. Talk about, I've walked through some really hard stuff the past 2.5 years after saying yes to being obedient to God's calling, where I was like, wait a second, I thought, I said yes, things will get easy. He's like, no, the enemy does not want your freedom, your children's freedom, and all of the people that you are speaking truth over. So he's going to come against you. That he's promised. We know it. And so we have to also know the authority that comes from being a child of God, that we were made in his image and that we have all of his powers at our fingertips. But we have to believe it, right? Because our beliefs really will dictate the actions that we're willing to take, right? And so during this time, take a look at your life. If it's not the life you're dreaming of, I believe God put those dreams in your heart, the dreams for love and connection and for family. He wants to answer those. It may not look like what you imagine, but he wants to meet those needs. So as you just surrender that to him, lay it down and say, this is what I want. Help me, right? And what's so cool about him is when we invite him in, he answers
mm,
because he is not a controlling God. He allows you your free will. So it's when you are willing to invite him, help, I need something in this moment. Like I was crying out desperate on a bathroom floor and I heard him speak because I invited him in my desperation. And so our most darkest place can be the place where there's just a crack of light that comes in and starts the process of illuminating that darkness to where then the light
brings you back
overcomes
to the top.
the dark. Yes. And your story of him lifting you out of that. I mean, what a beautiful prophetic representation of like the work that has been done in your life and he will continue to do. So
I wanted
this
to
is
share,
the last
Megan.
thing. Yeah, I was going to say, I had one question for you, but you go ahead because I bet you'll answer it.
Today, when I look back on that miracle story, today I recognize that moment for me and the pits of despair and that bottom and that darkness that already swallowed me up, it was the ultimate baptism.
Wow.
When I came back to the top, there was a new sense of me that already had existed. It brought a new life within me, and hope, faith. It was like something is there, something is powerful. So yes, when I look back, that's the only best thing I can describe is that was my ultimate baptism.
And
into
you know,
faith.
one of the things that stood out is the surrender, right? And that was me at the depths of despair. I can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
What? Like,
Because
and that's where
wants your
he
heart.
shows up.
He wants your heart. The posture of your heart matters. If we're able to, that's that gift of free will to be able to choose, right? So our mental psyche wants to reject, disregard, push away. We are just so consumed with those lies, and that darkness just wants to like swallow us up. But when we come to a place to say, you know what? I am tired. I am done. And here's my heart. I'm not fighting intellectually anymore. My mental is that I'm done with that, right? It's my heart he wants. He wants whole of me, all of me. And it's my heart, the posture of your heart. I mean, and it doesn't take much. I mean, we take that one little step and he's already taken so many steps forward. And it's just an amazing, a sense of winning that per se, you know what I mean? So yes, I want to encourage people that are feeling in despair. And I mean, that isn't to say that I don't experience hardships every day, because I do. But when you do have God in your life, Christ as the center, I mean, it just makes it overcoming the hardships a little bit easier, a whole lot easier.
Well, that is the perfect way to close us out, because my question for you was going to be, what would you say to somebody who was in that dark place? And you just answered it.
Amen.
With that. And so thank you, listeners, for sticking with us in this story. I know there was a lot of heavy, and I'm just so thankful for you, Lilia, to share. I know that brings things up, but we're not going to let the enemy use the pain anymore. It's been transformed for good and for purpose, and to see others step into that transformation that is waiting for them if they just reach out. So if you are here and this has made an impact in your story, I would love for you to give a comment. If you need support, It's Your Story to Tell has lots of free resources. We offer scholarships so that no one has to do this work alone, because you need someone walking alongside of you who has navigated this and is come out on the other side, that can sit with you in those hard places and be that light in your darkness. I want you to take away from our stories that when God writes your story, nothing is wasted.
Thank you, Lilia. I wanted to close. Our stories are for his glory.
Yes. Amen.
Amen.
Well, thank you so much for being here with me today. And thank you, listeners. Come back and catch our episodes every Friday.
Thank you for having me.